Hello everyone, my name is Juliana Zinchenko and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I will be showing you how to take in the waist of your jeans using the dart method. I love the dart method because it doesn't involve a lot of seam ripping, and when it comes to jeans, the details and that yellow top stitching is really what it's all about, and I don't like to mess with that too much. So when I'm tailoring my jeans, the less seam ripping, the better. I feel like I often find jeans that fit me in the butt and the hip area, but they don't fit in the waist. So if you feel the same way, this is the perfect tutorial for you. I would only use this video if you have jeans that are a size or two bigger. If you have jeans that are bigger than that, that is for another method and another video, which I can also do as well. Before we get into it, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button to know when I have new tutorials up. And don't forget to like this video, it'll help me out so much. Let's get into the tutorial. Alright, before we get started, here is a list of everything that I use in this video. I will also have links below so you guys can get exactly what I'm using. Now, before we get started, I do want to mention that sewing jeans on a regular home sewing machine is going to be pretty tough, but it's not impossible. I definitely recommend using some sort of heavy duty machine if you have one. If you don't, I do give tips in this video on how to use your home sewing machine. I've tailored many jeans just using my regular brother. It's definitely possible, but you just have to be careful so that your needle and your machine doesn't break. Here are a pair of Wrangler jeans that I thrifted. I love them so much. They fit pretty nicely. They fit nice around my hips and my thighs and in every area, but there's a little too much room in the waist. When you have jeans like this that are pretty fitted, but the waist is too big, the dart method is perfect because you don't have to go in at the side seams or the back seam and do a ton of seam ripping. You can just put 2 darts in to fix the waist. The first step is to take some fabric chalk and mark how much excess fabric you have at the waist. So what you're going to want to do is gather the waistband at the back seam. And then once you feel comfortable with the fit, you're going to make 2 marks with your fabric chalk on both sides of where you're holding it at the waist. As you can see, I have my 2 marks there. Feel free to go over those lines again so you can really see where you marked. And now what we're going to do is seam rip the belt loops off that are going to be in the way, and then also seam rip the waistband. Now for the middle belt loop, you don't need to seam rip the bottom of it because it's not going to get in your way, but I'm going to, just for the sake of this video so you guys can clearly see what I'm doing. I like to measure once my belt loops are off, and my total excess is 1.5 inches. Alright, I'm all finished seam ripping, and now we're going to go in with 2 darts in the back. For my beginners, I want to go over darts and how to sew them so that you can go into tailoring your jeans with confidence. If you are not a beginner in sewing, feel free to skip this part. So this is what we call a single point dart, and all it is a triangle that you fold in half and sew along the outer line. We use darts to add shape to a garment, but they also come in handy in times like this when you just want to take in at the waist but leave the rest of the jean the same fit. So how you make a dart is you decide how long you want it to be and you draw a straight line, and then you're going to make equal measurements on both sides of that line. So let's say we're taking in 1 inch. So you want to measure 1/2 inch on one side of the line and then 1/2 inch on the other side, so that when you sew the dart, it's taking in a full inch. And then you just want to draw a straight line to the point of that middle line that we drew. Alright, and like I've shown you before, you're just going to fold at that middle line. And what I like to do is pin along that outer line, and then I look over at the other side and make sure that my pin is aligned with the line on the other side so that I make sure that I folded it equally. And then when you go to sew your dart, you want to make sure that you taper it at the end there. So there's a little bit of a curve at the end there, and this will prevent the dart from puckering or looking too pointy on the other side. And don't forget to backstitch at the beginning. And as for the point of the dart, in this video with my jeans, I did backstitch using the machine, but I actually recommend just sewing to that point of the dart, lifting up your presser foot, taking out the fabric, so you're left with 2 loose threads, and then to tie a couple knots by hand, because this will reduce the bulk at the point of your dart. All right, and that is how you make a dart. As you can see here, my dart starts off straight and then starts to curve off a little bit at the end there. We can see with this ruler that it's not a perfect straight line. And then another way to make your dart look super clean and professional is to iron it down on both sides. As you can see, our dart is super flat. It's not puckering at that point there. That is what we like to see. For step 3, we're going to decide where we want to place our 2 darts, and then we're going to draw them using a disappearing marker. Right now I'm just playing with the fabric, seeing where the darts are going to work. You want to make sure you have enough room to make your darts so that you're taking it at the waist, but no other area around here gets affected by it. We just are changing the waistline. Usually I would want to place a dart somewhere in the middle, like around this area, but as you can see here, we just don't have enough room. If I tried to make a dart in this area, it would be kind of tough, and it would most likely be pointy and pucker at the end, so I'm just going to move in a little closer to the center back seam. I'm measuring 2 inches from the middle on both sides. And I'm using a water-soluble marker, so all you have to do is just dab some water on it and it will disappear. And then I'm going to go in with a disappearing marker. The lines that you draw with this marker will disappear within a few hours, so you definitely want to get to sewing once you've made your marks. And now I'm going to make the middle line of my dart, and I'm going to find a straight line on the ruler and align it with the center back seam, just to make sure that I'm drawing a straight line that is parallel to my back seam. Now we're going to draw the 2 lines on the side, and how you figure out the measurement for this is you're going to take your total waist excess. Mine is 1.5 inches. You're going to divide that by 2, and that amount is how much each dart is going to take in. And then you're going to divide that number by 2. And that number is how much you're going to measure from that middle line of your dart. And then finish off your dart by drawing 2 lines on both sides. And then you're just going to fold your dart at that middle line. I like to pin right along that line and then flip my dart over to see if it's aligned with the line on the other side to make sure that I folded it perfectly in half. And before I get to sewing, I'm going to switch out my needle for one that is specifically made for sewing jeans. And then you're just going to sew along that line. And like I was telling my beginners in the dart overview, you want to make sure you have a little bit of a curve once you reach the point of the dart to avoid puckering at the end. And make sure you backstitch at the beginning. And like I was telling my beginners in the dart overview, with these jeans I backstitched at the point of the dart, but I actually recommend that once you reach the point of your dart to pick up your presser foot, remove your jeans from the sewing machine so that you have 2 loose threads, and then tying a few knots by hand and then cutting off the excess threads. Doing it this way and not backstitching on your machine will help reduce bulk at the point of your dart. All right, there we have it. Our 2 darts are finished. Moving on to step 5, we're going to iron down our darts. This will make our darts look even more flat and crisp. And if you've watched my videos, you know how much I love a tailor's clapper. Again, this is just another thing that's just going to make sure the dart stays super flat. And here's the finished look. I'm super happy with it. And now what I'm going to do is lay my waistband flat and then gather up the excess. And then using my disappearing marker, I'm going to draw 2 lines on both sides, just like we did in the beginning. And then I'm going to just extend those lines so I can really see them. And then I'm going to add 1/2 inch of seam allowance to both lines. So you're going to add seam allowance on the inside of these 2 lines, going towards the center of your waistband. And you want to do 1/2 inch of seam allowance. These are the lines where we're going to sew, and then these are our seam allowance lines where we're going to cut. Before we can sew the waistband together, we need to make sure that we seam rip the top stitch at the top of the waistband here. And then I'm going to open up my waistband and draw the seam allowance line, which in this case is 1/2 inch, so that I have a guideline while I'm sewing. And what we're going to do is open up our waistband and put the 2 pieces right sides together. And then you want to make sure that you unfold those folds at the end there and then pin along the line. And then you're going to sew along that line. Don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and end. And then you're going to clip off your loose threads and iron the seam open. Once I ironed that seam open, I'm going to fold the waistband and iron it again. Sewing jeans can be tough because you're sewing together multiple layers of thick denim fabric, so we want to make everything as flat as we possibly can. So once we top stitch the top of this waistband, we're only sewing together 2 layers of fabric, so it's going to be pretty easy. Now for the bottom part of the waistband, it's a little different. We're going to have 6 layers of fabric we're going to be sewing through once we have our jeans sandwiched in between our waistband there. So as you can see, it's going to be pretty thick, and sewing through that is going to be pretty tough. I'm going to show you guys a couple ways to reduce that bulk and make it easier on your sewing machine. The first thing that we're going to do is cut down the waistband seam allowance using pinking shears. Pinking shears prevents your fabric from fraying. So I'm just going to find the ends of my seam allowance and just cut it at an angle. Now when we fold our waistband at the ends there, it'll be much easier to sew through because we have a lot less fabric. Here's the waistband before I cut the seam allowance and after I cut the seam allowance. Just that little thing that we did made a huge difference. It's really important to do these tricks, especially if you're using your basic home sewing machine, because we don't want your machine to break and we don't want your needle to break. So we want our fabric to be as flat as possible. Then you want to iron down the folds on the sides of your waistband. It'll make our lives so much easier when we're top stitching the waistband. You can see the difference here on the side that I did iron and the side that I haven't. Now I'm just going to fold my waistband and iron it down one more time. Look at how nice and flat that seam is at our waistband now. But we're not finished. I have one more tip, and that is to hammer down all of the bulky parts of your denim that we're going to sew through. This is the only thing I can think to compare it to, but you know when you're making chicken cutlets and you have to like hammer down the chicken to get it really thin? That's basically what we're doing, but with our jeans. As you can see here, I'm showing you guys that there's going to be a lot of layers of fabric that we're going to be sewing through when we hit that back seam there. So I'm definitely going to be hammering down the bottom of my waistband and then also that back seam on the pant there. And then I'm also going to be reattaching the belt loop around that area, so I'm going to hammer that part down as well. This is what our waistband looks like after I've hammered it down. And let's go back to that before and after again, because look at our waistband before we implemented all my little tips and tricks. All right, you guys, we're in the home stretch, and what we're going to do is sandwich our pants back into the waistband and then pin and top stitch. And when you're sandwiching your pants back in, there's usually like a line that you can see on your denim of where it was originally sewn. So I just like to align my waistband back up to that line. And then I like to put the pin in where I'm going to sew so that I can flip the waistband around and make sure that I'm going to be catching it on the inside as well. All right, there we have it. This is the time I'm going to be switching out my regular machine with my heavy duty machine. And then I'm also going to be using a top stitching thread that is made for jeans. It's not the exact same color, but it's pretty close and you won't even be able to tell. All right, then I'm just going to stitch on the bottom there and then also finish off the top stitching on the top as well. Don't forget to back stitch at the beginning and the end. What I like to do is align the edge of my waistband to the edge of the inside of that presser foot right there. And then I'm just going to move my needle to where I want it to sew. And I even use the hand wheel to lower my needle in the fabric just a little bit to see that it's going to sew exactly where I want it to. And a tip for when you start is to gently hold both threads taut at the back of the machine as you sew the first few stitches. This helps prevent looping and ensures a clean start. Now, even though I'm using a heavy duty machine, sewing through multiple layers of denim fabric can be very tough. So anytime I get to the bulky areas, I actually don't use the foot pedal anymore. I will use the hand wheel and go stitch by stitch, just to be careful. All right, now that I'm done with the top of my waistband, I'm going to move on to the bottom part. And just like we did with the top, I'm going to align my waistband to that inside part of the presser foot so that it can help me sew a straight line. And make sure you're removing your pins as your needle's about to approach them. I've hit pins before and it's broken my needle in half, so be careful. So right here I'm using the foot pedal to sew, but as you can see, as I'm about to approach that center back seam where there's a lot more layers of denim fabric, I'm going to go stitch by stitch using my hand wheel. And I do break a sewing rule here. You never want to push or pull on your fabric while sewing. The feed dogs move the fabric for you. But in this case, tailoring jeans at home and sewing through multiple layers of denim, it can be tough. I will gently pull or push a little bit to move my fabric through. As you can see here with each stitch, I'm gently pulling at my jeans to move them forward. All right, there we have it. The top stitching is finished. I'm very happy with how it turned out. Make sure you clip the loose threads, and then we'll move on to sewing our belt loops back on. Now I can see where I seam ripped on my jeans, so I'm just going to place my belt loops right back where they were originally sewn. And it's nice because that belt loop covers up that back seam at the waistband. And then you're just going to sew on the top and the bottom there. And with the belt loops, I like to go over it a couple times so that it's super secure. So I will sew forward, then reverse, sew forward again, reverse, until I feel like it's really secure. Now, as you can see, the belt loop is also a lot of fabric to sew through. So I'm going to hammer down the top and the bottom of all the belt loops. Now with the belt loops, I do not use the foot pedal at all. I do each stitch using the hand wheel. It is just way too much fabric and way too thick to be using the foot pedal. It would probably break my needle. And then again, I'm just gently pushing and pulling my jeans through the machine. And there we have it. Now let's see how these jeans look on. I am very happy with how these turned out. They're fitted, but they're not too tight to the point where like they're gonna suffocate me if I eat a little too much food that day. And don't forget, you always have to do a squat test. The dart method comes out beautifully. You can barely tell they're there, and they're laying nice and flat. All right, you guys, that is it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It'll help me out so much. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button to know when I have new tutorials up. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and if you have any video requests. I get a lot of my video ideas from what you guys write in the comments, so let me know. I will see you in my next tutorial. Mwah.